I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here I am, trying to make sense of how my life changed so dramatically in just 2 years. My husband and I had been together for 16 years, 6 years of dating, 5 years of friendship before that, and 5 years of marriage. He was such a big part of my life that I could barely remember what it was like before him. He was smart, witty, and could make me laugh like no one else. We built a beautiful life together, sharing the same values, playing video games, traveling, and dreaming about our future. But beneath the surface, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. My husband struggled with trust issues stemming from his childhood trauma. Even though I never gave him any reason to doubt me, his mind would often jump to the worst conclusions. Something as simple as unwashed dishes could spiral into him thinking I didn't respect our relationship. It was exhausting, walking on eggshells, never knowing what might trigger his next emotional outburst. We'd been in couples counseling for years. Initially, it was just for maintenance, But last spring, everything started falling apart. My husband sank into a deep depression, and that summer became what I can only describe as hellish. The smallest things would set him off. Once, he got upset because I hadn't marked his message as read on our chat app. I had only glimpsed it through my phone notifications. He'd go days without talking to me, except for necessary household questions through messages. The passive-aggressive messages were the worst, especially when I was out. He'd send texts that were clearly meant to make me come home, though he'd never admit they were manipulative. When things got really bad, he'd scream in my face or knock things over. There had been incidents in the past where he'd punched walls or pushed past me during arguments. I tried my best to support him through it all. When he was stressed, I'd take on extra housework, order his favorite food, or watch shows he liked, even though I didn't care for them. I'd hold him while he cried and pick up the slack wherever I could. I didn't even resent it. Isn't that what partners are supposed to do? But then I started struggling with depression myself. Unlike him, I didn't lash out. I just got really, really sad and needed support. The few times he tried to help, it would somehow end up being about him. Like the time he offered to pick up my favorite pizza when I was feeling down. By the time he got home, he was so frustrated about the wait and other customers that he couldn't even be around me. The breaking point came on what started as a good day. I was having a really rough time, and he actually showed up for me. Held me while I cried, helped around the house, talked me through my feelings. I started feeling a bit better that evening, and then, out of nowhere, he hit me with passive-aggressive comments. He started complaining about how I wasn't meeting his needs and how I prioritized everyone else over him. I was devastated. Here I was, constantly thinking about his needs, probably more than my own, and it still wasn't enough. That same night, our basement flooded. When I went to check what was happening, all I could hear was slamming doors and yelling. When I asked what was going on, he screamed in my face. I can still remember feeling my whole body shake as he yelled, "What the hell do you think?" That's when I realized something had to change. I've always been terrible at setting boundaries. The fear of making people angry or having them leave me has always held me back. And honestly, I had plenty of real-life experiences that justified those fears. But during one of our therapy sessions that summer, I finally found the courage to set some explicit boundaries about what wasn't okay during arguments. No screaming, no throwing things, no passive-aggressive comments. Every time I tried to enforce these boundaries, it felt like I was walking through broken glass. I'd say things like, "ouch," or "that wasn't okay to say," or "I need to leave the room until we can talk calmly." It was painful, but I kept trying. The screaming incident, especially coming right after the day he'd supposedly been there for me, was the final straw. We ended up in crisis mode when I set a firm boundary about the screaming. I told him it could never happen again, ever. Some friends who had survived abusive relationships pointed out to me that screaming in someone's face is a form of violence, even if there's no physical contact. But when I talked to my husband about it, he said setting this boundary was setting our relationship up to fail. He claimed he couldn't guarantee he wouldn't do it again. And if this was truly a hard line for me, we should end our relationship. I kept thinking if I had said, "You can never hit me again," instead of, "You can never scream in my face again," no one would question if that was a reasonable boundary, even if the hitting had happened rarely, just like the screaming. I suggested anger management therapy, especially since he'd recently found out he had high blood pressure. He didn't even respond to that suggestion. The thought of ending my marriage felt like someone was ripping my heart out. I hadn't taken those vows lightly. But I couldn't keep living like this either. He said he wanted to change, but it would be a journey. Code for things aren't going to change anytime soon. After a lot of soul-searching and therapy sessions, I told him what I needed. He had to get anger management therapy or some other immediate help. Learn how to support me during tough times without making it about himself. And not just tolerate, but actively encourage me setting boundaries. I explained that my trust in him was broken, and rebuilding it would take serious work. We went back and forth for what felt like forever. He kept saying he didn't understand what I wanted, even though I'd explained it multiple times. Meanwhile, the passive-aggressive messages continued, and he kept pushing back against any boundaries I tried to set. Finally, I suggested a separation but wanted to keep working on our relationship, maybe date during the separation. I thought some space might give us a chance to heal without doing more damage to each other. He said he needed time to think about it. A week later, during therapy, he dropped the bomb. He no longer wanted to be married or in a relationship with me at all. At first, we were kind to each other. We even spent a few evenings together, sharing our grief. He asked for 3 months to get his finances in order before moving out, and I agreed. But then one weekend, everything fell apart again. He picked a fight and started sending those manipulative messages again. I thought maybe he was drunk, so I waited until morning to respond. But he just doubled down and said even worse things. I spent the weekend avoiding the house as much as possible. Monday morning, I was hiding in bed, flinching at every sound as he stomped around the house, screaming at our cat and slamming doors. I ended up taking a sick day because I was such a mess. With shaking hands, I sent him a message saying that his behavior was emotionally abusive and I didn't feel safe in the house with him. I told him we needed to change our timeline for him moving out. I was terrified just sending that message. My whole body was trembling. He acted like I was being ridiculous and asked how soon I wanted him out. When I said the end of April, he freaked out and insisted he needed until July. Then, in a complete turnaround that gave me whiplash, he suddenly said a friend would lend him money and he'd be out by early April. He spent the whole week packing and apartment hunting and then announced he'd be moving out that Sunday. Part of me felt relieved, but I also knew this sudden switch was just his way of trying to control the situation. I could already imagine the story he'd tell everyone, how I didn't care about his pain and kicked him out early. It's been about a year since all that happened, and sometimes I still can't believe how much my life has changed. After he moved out, it was like I could finally breathe again in my own house. I didn't have to cringe at every little sound anymore. Yes, I was sad, but my space was finally my own. Then life decided to throw me another curveball. I got laid off. Talk about terrible timing. I had to job hunt while dealing with the emotional aftermath of my marriage ending. As soon as I found a new job, I discovered my house needed expensive repairs that I couldn't afford, especially after supporting him through a year of unemployment. He kept reaching out for a while, sometimes just to chat, but his messages always had that undertone of emotional manipulation that I was finally learning to recognize. Once he actually messaged to ask if I regretted our entire relationship or thought he was a terrible person. I didn't even respond to that one. Then he'd send weird messages like asking if I wanted to buy or fix the broken TV he'd taken from our living room. Recently, he even asked if he could be my roommate because his rent was too high. I couldn't even find words to respond to that. But here's the thing. Life has a way of surprising you. The new job I found, even though it paid less, turned out to be possibly the best job I've ever had. I love the work, the people, and the location. My coworkers and managers have been giving me great reviews, and I think I might be able to negotiate a good raise soon. I even bought my first car by myself, something I'd never done before because we'd always shared a car. I was nervous about negotiating, but I managed to get the dealer down by $1,000, and I absolutely love my new car. And then something unexpected happened. I met someone new. He reminds me of my ex in some ways. He has the same creative spirit, similar hobbies, and a great sense of humor. But he's different in all the important ways. He's genuinely kind and thoughtful, not just to me, but to everyone. When we disagree about something, we can talk it through calmly. No yelling, no drama. He respects my boundaries and shows me every day how much he values my perspective and autonomy. He's not broken and doesn't need me to fix him. And you know what? I'm not broken either. Sure, I'm carrying some extra baggage, but who isn't? The relationship is still new, but it feels like a game changer for both of us. I'm excited to see where it leads. And the best part? My divorce will be final this Friday. Yes, the day after Valentine's Day. Talk about timing. Looking back at those dark days, I sometimes wonder how much of my depression was actually from carrying the weight of emotional abuse for so long without even realizing it. When you're in that dark tunnel, it's easy to think that's all there will ever be. But I'm standing in the sunshine now, and even though I'm still working on recovering financially and processing 11 years of emotional abuse, I'm actually truly happy. It took time and it took work, and no, things aren't perfect. But they're so much better than I ever imagined they could be when I was hiding in my bed that Monday morning, flinching at every slammed door. If you're in that dark place right now, please know that it can get better. It really, really can.